Welcome to the You on the Camino de Santiago podcast. This podcast is for and about first-time pilgrims walking the pilgrimage routes in Spain, France, and Portugal. With your host, guide and longtime pilgrim, Nancy Reynolds of the Camino Experience. If you are thinking of walking the Camino Português, you will be happy to know that my guest today will be walking that route and is here to share her story. Hi there, Nancy here, happy to introduce you to Sandra and some more pilgrim wisdom that applies to all the many Camino routes. I have to tell you, people say the most profound things to me on this podcast. Sandra is no exception. She reminds me of the importance of setting intentions for the pilgrimage. Why is that so important? Because often what we want for our Camino experience is what we want for our lives. And if we can start to work with our intentions before we even leave home, and then focus more closely on them while on our way to the trail and while walking, then I think we give ourselves a better chance of realizing those intentions. The question came up again in this conversation about what is a true pilgrim. Well, we already know that where you sleep and whether or not you carry your backpack are not the measures of a true pilgrim. So I'm going to give you my current definition of a true pilgrim. Here's the question I want you to consider. Is the Camino, for you, a pilgrimage? Well, to answer that question, we have to understand what a pilgrimage is. I have previously shared with you some definitions from the book The Art of Pilgrimage by Phil Cousineau, and I'd like to share a couple with you again. Cousineau says, pilgrimage is a journey to a sacred center. He goes on, pilgrimage is a spiritual exercise, an act of devotion to find a source of healing. Always, it is a journey of risk and renewal. For a journey without challenge has no meaning. One without purpose has no soul. And then he says this, pilgrimage is a powerful metaphor for any journey with the purpose of finding something that matters deeply to the traveler. So here's what I think. If you answer the question, is this a pilgrimage for you, with a resounding yes, then I think you are a true pilgrim. Now, some people will disagree with me, but you already know that my goal is always to empower you to have the Camino experience your heart is longing for. So, blessings on whatever that is. I am going to take that a step further and say that pilgrimage is also about who you are in your life, not just what you do and what you seek while on the Camino. Pilgrimage can set you up on a lifelong journey to know yourself and to know God at a deeper level. The lessons we learn on pilgrimage will serve us in our daily lives. Lessons like one step at a time, keep your pack light, live simply, be sure to disconnect from the online world every so often, spend lots of time outside, and share your story with others. When you return home from your pilgrimage, you get dropped right back into daily life. That is not all that. You are instantly connected through your smartphone. You suddenly have way more stuff than you can use each day, and your to-do list blows up with your needs and the needs of the people in your life. You find yourself trapped indoors, moving less, and wishing you were back on the trail where everyone around you understood and shared your priorities. I think I've said this before. The most daunting part of walking the Camino is getting started, but the hardest part is coming home. If you have already walked the Camino, I would love to hear from you. Specifically, I would love to know what your biggest challenge has been in returning home. I sent out a survey to the people on my email list back in January, and I got about 100 responses. There are definitely some themes, like how to understand and bring home the lessons of the Camino, how to tell your Camino story, and how to manage in a not-so-simple world when you are longing for the simplicity of the trail. If you would like to complete that survey, if you haven't already, check the show notes. I've got the link there for you. Now, I have something brewing for all of you who have already walked the Camino, and I hope to introduce it to you in early June, after I get home from my upcoming trip to the Camino Frances. So stay tuned. I also have a promotion coming up on my audio guide for pilgrims walking the Camino Frances from Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port. I mentioned in the last episode that I'm doing a remodel on the audio guide and that it will have a new name that more accurately reflects what it actually is. Well, I haven't updated everything yet, but I want to share the new name. The audio guide is now called the Camino Planning Kit. Well, it makes sense, right? Because with this audio guide, you can literally put together your entire Camino experience, built step by step from the decisions of when to go and how long to take, all the way through selecting your boots and backpack, planning your stages, booking accommodations if you want to do that in advance, and the piece everyone needs, figuring out how to get to Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port so you can start your walk. I have a promo on the planning kit coming up the last weekend in April. If you'd like to get on the waiting list for that promo, you can go to thecaminoexperience.com/promo to let me know you're interested. That link is also in the show notes. In the meantime, let's go ahead and meet Sandra and get all her pilgrim wisdom. Here we go. Sandra, hi. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Oh, great. I'm just so happy to get to have this conversation. When I received your request to be on the podcast, I thought we have some stuff in common here. This is going to be a fun conversation.
We do indeed.
Yeah, we've both got some corporate America history. We've got the same age range, hitting a milestone birthday. So lots of things to talk about. And of course, right at the heart of it is the Camino experience.
Yes.
So how about we start where I always start, and that is to put the pin in the map. Will you share with us, please, your plans for walking the Camino?
Sure. So I start the Camino mid-May.
Okay.
And I landed on the Portuguese route. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out what route was best for me. And a few years ago, I had bought John Brierley's book, and it was the Camino Frances. And at the time, that was the only Camino I knew of. I thought there was one Camino. And so I was not planning because I hadn't really started planning, but sort of conceptually, that was the route I was going to do.
Okay.
And then when I started in this past February, I started looking more seriously at doing the Camino because I had just retired at the end of 2024. So now felt like a really good time. And as you said, it's a big milestone birthday. This year I celebrated turning 60, which still sounds really strange to say.
You know what? When I look at you, I think if that's what 60 looks like, this is good. We're all good.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it just, the timing felt right. And I started looking more closely. And it was really between the Portuguese route and the Frances. And I kept coming back to the Portuguese route. And I think what attracted me to it was the fact that it was less busy and more, I think 24 or 25% of people do that route versus the Frances. So that intrigued me a little bit, sort of, it's not quite a new frontier, but, newer. So that was appealing. And then when I started learning about the different options on the route, so what I'm planning to do is start in Lisbon, which I've since learned not a lot of pilgrims do.
I think you're right. Statistically, yeah.
Yeah, most start further north in Tui or Porto.
Mhm.
And on one of the Facebook groups I'm part of, I saw, I think it was last week, they posted 25 people had started on the Portuguese route from Lisbon this year. So that's not a lot of people. Now it's early in the season. So perhaps by the time I get there in May, we'll have a few more pilgrims. But that not having a lot of pilgrims on that part of the route is actually appealing to me.
Hmm.
So I sort of see this experience as being a combination of solo time, where it's me and going inward, and then outward time, because I really look forward to meeting other pilgrims from around the world. So I felt like on this route, I would get a bit of both. So I'll start on the central route and then move over to I know it's called coastal, but it's the new coastal, also called the littoral way,
Okay.
where 80% of the route is along the coast and the ocean. And that really appealed to me. There's something about the ocean that I really respond to.
Mm.
And then I really wanted to do the spiritual way. And I am not a religious person. I would say I'm a spiritual person, but following the route that St. James, well, the body of St. James took on the way back to Santiago, I don't know. There was something about that that really appealed to me. So at the end of the day, I think the Portuguese route really called to me.
Okay.
And so that's the route I'm going to do.
Okay. I love all of that. And I love how you sort of delineated between the first part from Lisbon, not being so busy, maybe having a lot of reflective time, solo time, but also I don't think you'll be alone out there.
No,
Yeah. But then you pick up probably in Porto is where the numbers of pilgrims will pick up. And then that's also when you have those different choices of routes.
right. Right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And actually, I'm my husband, who's not joining me on the walk, will join me in Santiago, and we are going to once I collect my Compostela, we the next morning are going to cycle to Finisterre, and because he doesn't want to walk, he's older than I am, which I know there's lots of pilgrims who are his age, but it's just not what he wants to do. And originally I had planned to walk to Finisterre, but he wanted to join me. And I thought, what a great way to end my Camino, one, with my husband, and two, in Finisterre, which I think has a really cool history with,
Okay.
pilgrims ending there and soaking their feet in the ocean as sort of this restorative thing, like a spa, after their walk, and how people used to think it was the end of the world.
Isn't that amazing? That is
I
so
know.
fascinating. Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to this spectacular sunset over the lighthouse.
Okay. Well, I'm wishing you clear skies and beautiful cloud formations for that to happen,
Thank
not
you.
rain. Yeah. It is very poignant, isn't it, to think about walking to the end of the world, even though we know the world has been mapped and measured and it's much more than that now. But if you put yourself into the mindset of the medieval pilgrim or even earlier when people were looking for the end of the world, it's quite poignant to think about that.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. And that's what's so neat about the Camino is it's so much in one thing,
Yeah.
right? It's adventure, it's physical, it's mental, it's spiritual. It's a lot of things I really enjoy. So I'm
Oh,
really
yeah.
looking forward to it.
Yeah, it sure does offer a lot. So, how long will you take to get from Lisbon to Santiago?
I am going to be on the Camino for 34 days.
Okay.
And I'm actually working with a woman in who's based in Porto, who I guess I call her my Camino consultant.
Okay.
And I didn't want a guided tour, but I was feeling I've never done a solo trip other than when I lived in Canada to the United States. So the idea of doing this big bold trip is a little daunting, I guess.
Sure. That's a perfect word.
yeah. And I mean, the fact that I've got to walk 435 miles is
Enough.
daunting.
It's
Yeah.
enough, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's big enough. Thank you very much.
But the idea of like, how far can I walk in a day? Am I going to have a place to sleep? Where do I sleep? And I knew I didn't want to sleep in albergues. And
Okay.
I know that's what a lot of people decide to do. And
Yeah.
I really responded to something you said. I think it was the very first podcast of yours I listened to. And it was join the Facebook groups, read all about it, sort of take what works for you and leave the rest. There is no right or wrong way to do the Camino. And I would say at the beginning of my planning, it was like, well, I better do the Frances because that's the real Camino, and I better carry my own stuff, and I better sleep in El Arague. And the more I thought about it, it was no, that's not what works for me, right? And okay, I'm not carrying my own stuff. I'm using luggage transfer. That's what I choose to do. I can carry my own things, but that's not what I want. And I know I need a good night's sleep. And sleeping in a dormitory is not going to give me a good night's sleep. And I did not want to spend all day walking, wondering where I was going to sleep. So it was important to me to plan for where I was going to stop, not just the place I was going to stop, but the accommodations so that I can just enjoy the experience of being on the Camino, knowing I have a place to sleep. So I looked at a couple of different options. There was like, I didn't find any fully guided tours, which I wanted to do initially. Certainly not for the full Camino, which for me is 34 days
Yeah.
plus the time to Finisterre. But I wanted help. And so I discovered this woman quite by accident, just in some of the research I was doing. She's based in Porto and she advises pilgrims on, sort of answer some of the questions. She can't tell me how far to walk in a day, but we talk about my fitness level and, what am I looking for? And so after a couple of conversations with her, my sort of requirements were I'm not in a hurry. I want to take what it takes. It is important for me to know where I'm sleeping at night. I want private accommodations. I want to do the 3 different parts of the Portuguese route. And I want to have a rest day where it makes sense, not just for the rest, but to spend time in cool little towns
Okay.
because I want to see some of that. And I didn't provide her any other direction. I said, you tell me where you think, the cool places are, where there's things to see. And she did. And she put this route together and we talked about it. We made a couple of adjustments. She advised me on, she gave me options for accommodations that met my requirements. And then I got busy on booking.com and, got everything booked. And so that's all settled now, which feels really good.
Okay.
So we're just working on the luggage transfer part, which from Porto beyond, that's easy. But from Lisbon to Porto, it's a little more of a challenge. So
Okay. Okay. Well, let me ask you then, what kind of a challenge is it from Lisbon to Porto? Are there fewer companies?
supply and demand, basically, right? There's
Okay.
not as many pilgrims. And so we found 2 companies that do it. But instead of the €8 a stage, which is, what I've discovered is the average from Porto beyond, I think it's €24 a stage.
Oh, wow.
Crazy. I know.
Okay. So what we need to do is get more people to walk from Lisbon to Porto so we can get that service
Right.
rocking. Yeah.
Exactly. Or Sandra carries her own bag, which I did consider,
Yeah.
but then no, no. So,
Okay.
so that's proven to be the biggest challenge so far.
Okay. So I'm just cheering in my mind that you have made the decisions that are right for you. And I so appreciate hearing that you heard that on the podcast because that really is the song I sing. Do it your way. And so many people say, no, the right way to do it or the best way to do it. And what they're doing is they're reporting on how they did it. And because they had a transformational experience, they think that's the way to do it. And I'll tell you, it absolutely was for them.
Right.
The way that I've done it over the years has absolutely been it that way for me. And the way that you do it, when you mindfully, consciously choose how to structure your Camino based on what you know your needs to be and based on what you want out of the experience, that is the right way for you. So I applaud you. Well done.
Well, thank you. And again, hearing that, I'm so glad I did early
Yeah.
because when you're on the Facebook groups, you hear things like, I know I'm going to get backlash if I say this, but,
Oh,
and, people are like, it's not a stroll. This is not a vacation. It's like,
yeah.
why can't it be? Why can't it be a pilgrimage? And I'm no less a pilgrim because I'm not carrying all of my stuff.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned to you, I had climbed Kilimanjaro 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And people said at that time, oh, well, you don't carry all your stuff. That's just like glamping. I'm like,
Oh, no.
okay, do it then. Okay. And it's the same thing, just like I made that my experience. I want this to be my experience. And it's different from yours. And I don't judge anybody else for having the experience. The pilgrims back in the day probably did it barefoot. I don't have to do it barefoot to prove I'm a pilgrim. So,
Very good. I look forward to the day when people don't feel that they have to say, I know I'm going to get backlash for this. Please don't give me your judgment. I just can't wait for the day when we don't even have to say that. I also long for the day when we don't have to qualify why we're doing it a certain way. For example, I'm using the luggage transport services because I have back issues. How about just I'm using the luggage transport services? Right?
exactly.
Yeah, right. And no question about it, it's a different experience if you use luggage transport than if you carry your backpack. And both bring different experiences and lessons, but neither is invalid. Both are valid.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
There's Nancy on her soapbox. All right, I said it.
And I appreciate that you do.
Yeah. So I'm curious about the person you're working with in Porto. Is that somebody that we can name and let people know about?
Absolutely. And I did get her permission.
Okay, great.
Her name is Nicoletta, and
Okay.
her website is like YOUR dash Camino.com.
And you said she lives in Porto.
She does. And
Okay.
so we are actually going to try to meet for dinner. So we'll get to meet face to face when I'm in Porto, because that is one of the towns I'm stopping in and having a rest day.
Okay.
So I
Wonderful.
look forward to that.
I'm happy to know about her because I get people ask me fairly regularly, do you do this on the Portuguese route? And I don't know that route, except for the parts that I've driven. And I have visited Porto, but I can't advise you on stages or where to get out, how to get out of Porto or anything like that. Yeah. Great. I appreciate that. So I will put that information in the show notes so people can refer to that and get help with their Portuguese route now that we have an expert in the house. So that's great. Yeah. All right. Well, I want to go back to something that you said at the very beginning when you were talking about your plans. And that was that you had thought that the Camino Frances was the only Camino route. You weren't aware that there were other routes. I'd like to hear more about that. How did you come to think that that was the only route?
Because I think, like most people I talk to, when they find out I'm doing the Camino, they say, "What is that?" They don't know, and I think that's where I was. Somebody had, I don't know, I was having a conversation with somebody, and they just mentioned they had a friend who did the Camino, and I asked them, "What is that?" And they said, "Oh, it's this pilgrimage." This was several years ago. And I had been asked ever since I did Kilimanjaro, people said, "Well, what's your next big thing?"
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, well, nothing speaks to me yet. And, before I invest time and energy into something, I want to make sure that, I can immerse myself in it. And so
Yeah.
I looked at going to Everest Base Camp, but that kind of feels like you're starting something, but not finishing it. And there's no way I'm climbing Mount Everest. That's just not my jam.
not knowing anything about it, base camp feels like, really? That's all you're doing? But
Yeah,
it's actually quite extreme just to get to base camp.
it is. And then I thought, okay, well, hiking in Bhutan. So I bought a book about that, and that is still of interest to me, right? Because
Okay.
again, similar things, you're getting that adventure, you're getting the spiritual aspect of it as well. And then somebody mentioned the Camino, and I was like, oh, what's that? And so when I started researching, initially it was Frances. And so I thought, okay, it's the Camino.
Okay.
And, I was surprised to learn, I can't remember the number, but there's a 9 or even more official routes of the Camino. And I thought that was really neat. And what was important to me is I do the full route. And I know, I've been told coming out of Lisbon, even Nicoletta said this, I think the first 80 kilometers, it's not very exciting, but at least it's the first 80. So I got lots to look forward to
Right.
after that. And she said that's why a lot of people don't start in Lisbon, that it's way easier to start in Porto. But it was important to me to do, I'll say the full, like the longer version, kind of like I don't want to go to Everest Base Camp. If I were going to do it, I want to go to Everest, which isn't to say, doing part of a Camino is not right for other people. But
Hmm.
for me, I don't know, to have this experience I want, it was important to me to do the full route.
Gotcha. Yeah, totally get that. Totally get that. I remember on my first Camino, I started in Pamplona on the Frances. And about a week into it, I started hearing people talk about Saint Jean Pied de Port. We'd started in Saint Jean. We'd come over the Pyrenees. I didn't even know that was an option. So here I was in the middle of it thinking, oh man, I missed out on something.
I'll have to go back.
And I did. I did. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm hoping that's the experience I have where maybe I do go back and do, because the idea of going over the Pyrenees is, a challenge, and that is
Yeah.
appealing. So
Yeah.
maybe it won't be my last.
I have a feeling it won't. Yes, especially if you stick with this retirement thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is interesting that you are retired. And I think I approaching 60, I don't feel like I'm ready for retirement. How's retirement fitting into your scheme of your life here? How's it fitting in?
I would say so far, very well. I was not sure what to expect. I mean,
Okay.
when you're in the corporate world for, okay, a lot of years,
A
right?
couple decades at
Yeah,
least.
a
Yeah.
couple, yeah. You think, and when you immerse yourself in your career, you think, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to spend my time?
Uh-huh.
And my husband retired like 10 years ago, and he fills his days. And he says, oh, you'll get used to it really, really fast. I was a doubter. I said, there's no way. Like, I'm going to get up every day and do what? Well, sure enough. And I think the Camino has helped with that because I work out, I worked out before. Working out is not new to me, but now I'm not in a hurry. And so I spend 6 days a week, I spend walking, weight training, or doing yoga, which I've adjusted for the Camino. And by the time I get home, it's noon. So there's my morning. And then my afternoon, I spend a good 2 to 3 hours planning and researching for the Camino. So, in a way, the Camino has given me purpose.
Okay.
And I would say my Camino doesn't begin in Lisbon. My Camino has already begun.
Hmm.
And I am someone, and I know you, based on how you've talked on the podcast, you're similar. I love the planning and
Yes.
the researching. And, who knew, there was a special way to lace your shoes so that your foot doesn't slide, and what shoes to wear, and how do you prevent blisters, and how do you treat blisters. And there is so much to learn. And I look at the Facebook groups and they'll say something, and I think, oh, okay, I better research that. And so a lot of my afternoon is spent researching. And so my time has filled up quickly. And what I'm hoping happens on the Camino is I don't know what's after the Camino. I don't know what's next in this new chapter of my life. Do I want to stay retired? Probably not. I need something to occupy my time. I've toyed with the idea of doing something on my own business of some sort where I can earn money, or maybe I'll go back to a job, but I'm not sure I want a corporate job at this stage of my life,
Sure.
but something. I volunteer now, which is fulfilling. And I think I'm in a really good place now. But what I'm hoping on the Camino is that this time, especially the time where, well, no, both on my own and with others, I think having conversations with others, reflecting when I'm alone, I think answers come to me.
Hmm.
And,
Yes.
historically, that has proven to be the case for other big things that I've done in my life. And I think I read something the other day that actually said, walking is your body's way of making sense of what happens to us, and it regulates your nervous system, which is why a lot of people, when they're walking, can think more clearly.
Sure.
And so I'm hoping for that experience when I'm on the Camino.
Yeah, for sure. There is something about moving at the pace of walking that opens us up to whatever it is, wherever those ideas are coming from, it opens us up to receive them.
Exactly.
I think there is actually science behind it. There's a book that I read a couple years ago that I'm hoping to do a podcast episode on at some point. It's called The Joy of Movement. And she just nails it. I mean, when I read that book, I thought, Camino, Camino. Oh, yeah, Camino. Oh, Camino. Yeah, it's all of that. There is something in movement that brings us to those realizations, opens up those channels.
I agree.
Yeah, very good. So the way that you describe retirement, it sounds like there's no room for a job at this point. There's no room for work. And so to really,
Absolutely not.
yeah. And so to really dig into what you're doing and really put your focus on that, you're just a couple months away from starting the Camino. It's a great use of time given what you're up to.
It absolutely is. And I would say when I first started, I really didn't decide that, okay, I'm doing it until mid February.
Okay.
And again, I had been, physically, I think I'll be ready because I had been working out and I've been wanting to do it, but things never clicked. And I thought now is the time. I have this time. I have zero interest in looking for a job right now. And I'm trying to listen. And, when you're building a career, it's all about what's the next best move to get me to where I want to go. And I did great. I had a very successful career. I'm fortunate. And that's why I'm able to take this time now and not be in a hurry. I don't want to rush this experience because, obviously the goal is to make it to Santiago and collect my Compostela, but how I do that, that's the journey. And that's the part I'm looking forward to. And I don't want to define that too much because I want the experience to unfold and for the Camino to give me what I need versus what I want.
Yeah.
So I'm trying not to go in with big expectations, but more with curiosity and an open mind and sort of take it as it comes. And that's the good and the challenges. I won't say the bad, right?
Yeah, because they're coming. They're coming. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always think, do we ever get through a month in life at home without a challenge? Not really.
No,
So
no.
it's kind of interesting that we think we'll go to the Camino and it will be bliss the whole way. There probably will be some challenges.
But when you read the Facebook posts and people talk about, how euphoric they were and how great it was, it's like, no, there's a lot in between there that we're not talking about.
Yeah, I think that's the endorphins talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's real. And it's, when I ran marathons, it's a challenge and you can do it doesn't matter what you prepare for. You train the best you can, you plan the best you can, but ultimately the outcome, you can get injured. I ran a marathon one year. I was sick. I had the flu. Stupidly, I finished it. Kilimanjaro, you get altitude sickness. Here, who knows? Certainly sore muscles, blisters, getting lost. Who knows?
Yeah, you just don't know. Yeah.
No, but it's working through those things, I think, is part of the experience. And for me, I think will be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if we just look back, let's just pick a year, any year of your life, and look at the challenges that we faced and how we walked through them. We've got the tools, we've got the
Exactly.
experiences. We can do this. You mentioned curiosity a moment ago, and I'm always curious as to what is the theme of someone's Camino journey. To me, it sounds like your theme might be curiosity, and that is sort of the underlying current of what you're going to take with you.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but as you said it, I'm nodding my head. I absolutely agree. That is
Yeah,
exactly it. Yes.
yeah. Is there anything else that you would add that might be a theme for this Camino or an intention for this Camino?
Going with the flow.
Okay.
And for anybody who knows me, that is not easy. Obviously, I do all this planning to try to minimize risk, right?
Uh-huh.
And allay my fears. But at some point, you have to say, okay, I've done what I can. And
Yeah,
now we're just going to let it happen. And the experience will be what it will be.
great. Yeah. Truer words have never been spoken.
So, yeah. And I think that's excitement for
Yeah.
me. So I'm writing that down so I can remember that.
Pack it and take it with you.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, very good. I also notice or have been noticing lately that a lot of times what we set as an intention for the Camino is actually what we want more of in life.
Truer words. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that is what I am trying to do. And I think one thing I've noticed since I've retired, when I go to the gym in the morning, I'm not rushing to get in my workout so that I have time to get everything in so that I can get home to get on that conference call. It's it's a slower pace. I'm not in a hurry. And
Yeah.
so I'm more present and in the
Yes.
moment and
Yes.
enjoying my workouts more
Mm.
than I did. And again, I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to do that, that I'm not distracted and rushing and, having to get a job and, that
Yeah.
I have the luxury of time
Yeah.
to focus on me and this right now.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I sort of compare it to the difference between being on the Camino and training for the Camino. For many people, training for the Camino is get it done, get it done, get it done, so you can move on to what's next in your day. On the Camino, it's more the way you're doing it. It's that expansiveness or spaciousness to say, no, this is what I'm doing today. This is it. And then
Yes,
when I finish this, not if, but when, then I'll do the next thing I'm doing today. And that's really very much the rhythm of the Camino.
I think it's really important. And I remember there's a saying, and I may not get it exactly right, but the only joy at the top of the mountain is the joy you bring with you.
Hmm.
And it's not summiting the mountain, it's not collecting the Compostela. That's not what it's about. That's not going to make you happy. What brings you joy is that experience. It comes from within. And maybe we need a Camino to access it, but it's within us. You think of the Wizard of Oz and she taps her shoes together. Same idea, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's tapping into that. And I know, I'll go back to Kilimanjaro again. There were people in our group, and I'll call them the athletes, and they wanted to be the first ones to the next camp and,
Uh-huh.
the first ones to the rest stop. And I became friends with this other woman I had met on the trip. We actually bonded because it became a bit of a joke that before we took photos, the two of us would stop and put on lipstick. And most people would think, why the heck are you climbing a mountain and lipstick is important to you? But, you do you, I do me.
Yeah.
So we bonded over that. And the two of us, you could find us at the back of the group with one of the guides, and we're chatting and, looking around. And the ecosystem on Kilimanjaro, it changes. And I wanted to appreciate that. And like the Camino, not everybody gets a chance to do something like this. And I really, you
Yeah.
know, I'm grateful that I have this opportunity and I want to appreciate the whole thing.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. So when you think about you on the Camino, you think about yourself in Lisbon getting ready to start, or you think about you in Santiago finishing, which of those has the bigger buzz for you?
Hmm. Can I say both, but for different reasons?
Yeah, yeah, let's hear it.
I think Lisbon will be the anticipation of getting started,
Mhm.
the excitement. Everything is fresh. I'm in Europe. I'm about to do this big thing that I've planned for and wanted to do. And so I'm excited. And I think there'll be a full dose of reality in between Lisbon and Santiago. And I think I mentioned I have no sense of direction. And
Okay.
I know people say the route is well marked, and okay, that's great. I have GPS and I still get lost
Okay.
in my car. And so just navigating the route, I think, will be, a challenge for me, which
Sure.
again is why, don't have the distraction of trying to figure out where I'm going to stay. Focus, right?
Great,
And
great.
and so, I'll deal with that. I think Santiago, whew, I think that's going to be a jumble of emotions.
Mm,
I think the first one I think of, the first word that comes to mind is gratitude for for having completed this journey and whatever that looked like. But I think I will be relieved, happy, but I don't think I will have fully processed it until after. And I
sure.
think I've read that's what
Totally
people,
normal. Mhm.
yeah. And so I think it's going to mean a lot of different things. My husband is going to try to meet me in the square, and I guess I hear there's thousands of people there, so we'll see how that works out.
Yeah.
But I said to him, don't talk to me until I talk to you. Just
Uh,
when you see me, I want you to sort of film me without me knowing to get sort of what my natural reaction is. Because I am curious. Tears, I am sure, will be shed. Happy tears, relief. I don't know. Like I said, I think it'll be a jumble of emotions, but I see in both instances, I see them as positive.
Okay. You're making me emotional just hearing all
Oh,
this.
I'm so sorry.
No, no, don't apologize. It's good. It's so good because I have spent enough time in that square and seen people coming in and the
Oh,
emotion and the celebration and the disappointment. All of it arrives in that square. So, yeah.
I think I was listening to a podcast yesterday when I was walking of yours. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he talked about how people jump in the square and how
Yes.
hard that is on your legs.
I'm not doing that.
I don't think that'll be me.
Yeah, I can't do that under the best of circumstances. I don't know how I would do it after walking 500 miles.
Exactly. And it
Oh my
certainly
gosh.
wouldn't make a pretty picture. So,
Right, right. Yeah. Some people look just gorgeous doing it. They look so, fit and spry. And yeah, that's not going to be me. It's going to look like a train
yeah,
wreck.
that will not be my Instagram moment.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all that with me. I just love this idea of how you're approaching this and the mindfulness with which you're creating your own Camino experience. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Um, I think one of the things I've heard is how people in Portugal and Spain appreciate when you try to speak their native language.
Mhm.
And so part of my training and research is learn right now, I'm learning Portuguese.
Oh,
And
great.
I found this podcast, which is, I think it's called Coffee Time Portuguese, and it's specific Portuguese lessons for the Camino.
Okay.
And they're 15-minute segments, and you learn. So I've done one segment, and it taught me how to say hello, which, hola. Um, how are you? And then how do you answer? And so I do I have these little flashcards that once I learn something, so I can practice. And so I
Great.
think that's important. And I don't know, like politically these days, I'm a little hesitant about how, as an American, even a Canadian American, I'm going to be received in Europe,
Okay.
given what's going on politically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's a show of respect that I'm here. This is your country, and I am going to do my best. I know they all speak English, but or most, but I am going to do my best to try to speak the language as a way of, showing respect and appreciation for being in their country.
Wonderful. And I think the best thing that we can do is look for where the language and the culture intersect in those cultural norms. For example, when you walk into any place in Spain, and I bet it's the same in Portugal, you start with buenos dias or buenas tardes. You never order something without greeting the person who's serving you. And so if we can remember that and do it in their language, that right there is a tremendous sign of respect.
I agree. And I think we're sort of a rushing society, right? And I remember being in Italy. We were in Venice and we were eating dinner in the Palazzo, and we had a concert to go to. And I remember we're sitting at this beautiful outdoor cafe and we're enjoying dinner, and service is, let's call it, longer, right? People in Europe take their time and they enjoy their meals as it should be. And I remember saying to the waiter at the time, like, excuse me, we've got to get to our concert. And he said, relax, you'll get there. You Americans are always in such a hurry. And I think that's right. And, pause, take the time to say hello. And, part of the experience, I think, is talking with the local people in addition to the pilgrims.
Yes.
And that's why I love travel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think somebody said, life is a book. And if you don't travel, you've only ever read one page.
That's it. I think that was Mark Twain.
Yeah, I believe it was. Yes. And that's one of the things I love about travel. And again, I've been fortunate to travel to many places.
Yeah.
And I love meeting people and experiencing different ways of life. And people can be happy with far less than what we have, materialistically.
Sure.
And there's lessons to be learned, I think.
Definitely. Definitely. I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah. Lots to learn out there. All right. Well, do you have any questions I can answer for you?
Tell me it won't hurt.
I could tell you that, but it might turn out to be a lie.
I know it will be a lie. That's okay.
My feet hurt every day at the end of a walk, every day.
That's what I heard.
Yeah. Yeah. And we just do what we can to prevent the pain and then deal with it if and when it comes. Yeah.
I agree. That's all we can do.
Yeah. Your feet will hurt. That's just part of it. When you're on them for 4 to 8 hours a day, they hurt.
Well, and it's funny because you talk to people and when you say, well, I'm walking, they go, oh, that's not bad. How far do you walk in a day? And I said, well, it varies. I think my longest day is I got to learn kilometers again. My longest day is 19 miles. I think my shortest day is 12. And and somebody said to me, oh, 12 miles, that's nothing. Like, you can do that. I'm like, okay, yeah, but it's 34 days in a row of walking that. That's something.
There's a cumulative effect. Definitely. Yeah, cumulative effect. And the thing that sometimes surprises people is they can go a week or two with no blisters and then one shows up. And it just blows out of the water. The idea of breaking in your boots will prevent blisters. You have to pay attention to your feet every single day.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yep. I have a whole resource document, and that's part of it. How to treat blisters.
There you go. Or how about, do you have the chapter on how to prevent blisters?
I do.
Okay.
Yes.
That's the more important one, in my opinion. Let's just not get them to begin with.
Let's hope that, knocking on wood.
Yes, exactly. Well, Sandra, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your experience, and your plans. I've got this wonderful picture in my mind of you walking the Camino Português. Thanks for sharing that story.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. That's it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Nancy. Bye-bye.